That's $42, thanks. Would you like to double or nothing?
Excuse me?
If you win, you get a discount.
Oh, look, I don't know.
That's $84.
$84? Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm afraid I didn't have that kind of cash on me.
That's all right.
Hang on, is that a poker machine or a cash register?
Maybe. Unlucky, $712.
Oh, hang on, maybe we should
so
stop.
Close, $1,428.
What's happening? Are you kidding me?
$5,693.
Okay, stop. I can't afford that.
Well, we're going to have the deeds to your house.
I thought you were a supermarket. I just wanted to buy some food to feed my family.
Hey, we're in the pokies business. Didn't you know that?
You're watching The World from Below, and that was an ad from GetUp highlighting the fact that supermarket chains Coles and Woolworths are some of the largest owners of poker machines in Australia. Tonight we're speaking with Charles Livingstone from the School of Public Health at Monash University and Jemal Ahmet from Whittlesea Community Connections. Charles, what was that ad all about?
Well, most people don't realise that the two major grocery proprietors in Australia are actually also amongst the biggest poker machine operators. In fact, Woolworths owns more poker machines than the 6 biggest casinos in Las Vegas combined. So they own about 25,000 machines around Australia.
And where are they? In hotels?
They're in hotels, yes. They're in ALH hotels. They have a joint venture with a guy called Bruce Matheson, who they've dubbed the Pokey King, who's become a billionaire out of his operations. And he makes hundreds of millions of dollars of profit a year for the joint venture, most of which goes to Woolworths. And it has to be said, ALH has a lot of hotels in very disadvantaged parts of Victoria and the rest of the country. And, you know, we know empirically that there are more poker machines in disadvantaged areas in New South Wales, in Victoria, in Tassie, in South Australia than there are in advantaged areas, and they occupy more of the social space. So they're very widespread in areas of disadvantage, and they make very significant amounts of money from those places.
So I just want to break down who makes the money from when you put $1 in a poker machine. Where do the funds go? Okay,
in Victoria, it varies from state to state, but we'll talk about Victoria. In Victoria, there's a variable tax rate, a progressive tax rate. So the most a hotel will pay in tax is around 50%. The most a club will pay in tax is 42%, but only when they're earning relatively high amounts of money. In fact, when the old regime was in place where there were a set of operators, Tattersalls and Tabcorp, as well as the venues, as well as the state government, the cut was roughly 30% each. But that's all changed now. And when the new arrangements came in place, the effective rate of taxation on most of these venues declined significantly. So we can say that with clubs, the amount of revenue they retained after the new arrangements began in 2012 was doubled, or more than doubled, and in the case of hotels it was on average doubled. So about more than half of the money goes to the state government, and more than half of the money goes to the venue, and a proportion of the funds goes to the state government.
Do we have an idea in Victoria about how much each
Yes,
year?
in Victoria about $2.6 billion a year is lost on poker machine gambling in clubs and pubs, not including the casino. And the state government gets about $1 billion of that in poker machine revenue.
$1 billion a year?
$1 billion a year, yep.
Jemal, what kind of programs do we have in place to deal with problem gambling? So if somebody presented to Whittlesea Community Connections, what kind of things could they do to address their problem?
Well, they would present to us with probably not their problem gambling issue to begin with. They would present to us with financial difficulty or a relationship breakdown issue or a family violence component, and ask for assistance with those. We find that the stigma associated with disclosing problem gambling is even worse than the stigma associated with disclosing family violence. So we find it very difficult for that. It's not often that people come and say, I've got a problem gambling issue. It may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 casework meetings later that becomes apparent to us, and then we're able to then offer referral to some specialist providers and services that do gambling and addiction related services. But we would obviously, when a case presents to us, is deal with the presenting issue and then try and work out what the underlying causes of that are. So if someone needs, obviously, emergency relief to get food on the table, we're not going to spend 5 weeks looking at the causes behind that. We're going to provide the assistance to help resolve that immediate issue, but then continue to work with people. And once they disclose, then we'll act on that. But so that description demonstrates to you the kind of investment that community services put in as a result of someone's problem gambling addiction. So it can be 5, 6 interviews and casework meetings before we get to the real issue. That all that cost resources and money that could have been spent on someone else if that problem wasn't there in the first place.
Do you recommend things like self-exclusion orders, or to what extent do you find them
we'll leave that to the specialist counsellors around problem gambling to work with the individual on, but we would make sure that they get the referrals and the supports and the information they need to access those services. So we think that's something that's best done one-to-one with the individual and the counsellor dealing with the addiction, rather than us recommend those things. I think, you know, there's been a lot of talk and research done around, you know, what works for individuals, but I think we need to start thinking about product safety rather than individual responsibility, and that's the key thing. The product, as Charles was describing earlier, are designed to addict, and there's a cynical manipulation of the gambling environment to ensure that that addiction sticks. So we're dealing with dangerous products, and we have no problems when, you know, we come to regulating and controlling, let's say, heroin or ice, but we seem to have a real lack of moral and political will to actually control something that has just as an important health dimension to it as any of those other things. And I think we need to, that's where we need to take the conversation to. You'll see a lot of ads on TV making it the responsibility of the individual to stop their gambling. We think there's a place for that, but it's only, it's a band-aid approach when really the products are the problem. I mean,
Tell us, Charles, what's your view about how, I mean, we talked a lot about the design of the machines and how they're addictive. What's your view about the scope for possible reform at that level?
It's, there's plenty of scope for it. I mean, we can get into the details of designs and say, well, you can do this, but you can't do that. Now, you know, that's fair enough. But the simplest and most straightforward way to deal with all of this, and the Productivity Commission said that this was the case, they're hardly known as Bleeding Heart Liberals, the Productivity Commission. In this case, they said there should be more regulation, and we should reduce the maximum bet for machines in local venues down to $1. And what they said they would do with that was it would mean that instead of losing an average of $1,200 an hour on the machine, the maximum you could lose would be an average of $120 an hour. So that immediately reduces a lot of the burdens on people and their families and so on. It also means that the take-up of problem gambling would be limited, because one of the key drivers for people becoming habituated to machine use is chasing their losses. So if they haven't got losses to chase, then they're likely to be in a lot better position. Now, that can be done almost at the flick of a regulatory pen, if you like. So in Victoria, the maximum bet was reduced from $10 to $5 in 2009. There was a minor blip in revenue, but it was introduced without a lot of fuss. It cost, you know, $200 or $300 million. The industry absorbed that without any great difficulty. We need to take the next step and go down to $1 bets. That can be done very readily, very easily, and will almost certainly have a very positive influence on the rate of gambling problems.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for on this week's episode of The World From Below. I'd like to thank our guests, Dr Charles Livingstone and Jemal Ahmet. I would also like to thank all our crew and producers and our host, RMI TV. You've been watching The World From Below. Thanks for joining us.